Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Church of Grace. My name is Patrick Hayes. Today is Friday, March 1st, and we are in Matthew part 20. So we are going to go over Matthew chapter 9. We're actually just going to finish it up. We're almost to the end. We're going to get through Matthew chapter 9. I don't think we're going to start Matthew chapter 10, but we'll see how we do. All right, so last week we ended with giving everybody a little bit of homework. So last week I asked you a question about what we taught on in the middle of Matthew chapter 9. We had a woman with an issue of blood that she suffered from this affliction for 12 years. Did anyone figure out the connection between not only that woman, but the young lady who had died that Jesus resurrected? Because the little girl was 12 years old. The woman with the issue of blood that she suffered, that had that affliction and was suffering from that, she suffered with that affliction for 12 years. So I do not believe even a little bit that God just arbitrarily threw the age of the little girl and the amount of time this woman was sick in there for no reason. Did anyone render a guess as to why those numbers are 12 years and why they are both 12 years? Mason? They are, I believe they're correlated. Of course, what do I know? Remember, my standing order to everybody is do your own homework. Okay, don't believe anything I say just because I say it. Go home and do your own homework and check to see if the things I teach you are so. So let me render a guess. Pam? Very good. Okay, the number 12. Okay, the number 12 is certainly very important. Numbers are important, and the number 12 does represent Israel. We have 12 tribes. So we have two things going on here. Bear with me, I'm going to grab a couple markers here. Okay, so number one, we have a woman who is sick, right? And we have a little girl, and the little girl is dead. Boy, that was bad. Dead is a four-letter word, and I started to misspell it. Now, we have several guests here. If you're not familiar with the motto of the Church of Grace, the motto is lower your standards. So the number 12 represents Israel. Just like the Jewish woman with the issue of blood, Israel was spiritually unclean. They have not received the work of Jesus and the new covenant. Now, when we find that this woman made her way up to Jesus and was able to just touch the hem of his garment, we talked about that last week, she was healed. Now, an interesting thing, that word that we find in the Bible that in Matthew 9 used for healed, that exact same word found in other places in the Bible is the same word they use for saved. See, that woman knew that if she could just get to Jesus, she could be saved. See, the same thing that could heal her physical disease is the same thing that could heal all of our spiritual disease. See, we have this spiritual disease. It started off early in our life. It's called sin. And that sin's a problem. That sin's going to keep us from getting into heaven. And that sin needs to be dealt with. And in the same way, that woman knew if I could just get to Jesus, I can be healed and I don't have to be sick anymore. Okay? The sinner finds out that if I can just get to Jesus, I can be saved. So this woman who represents Israel and their unclean spiritual state knew that if she could just get to Jesus, she could be saved. Jesus is the cure for spiritual disease. Now, when Jesus came, what was the issue that Israel was going through at the time? They were going through a rough time, spiritually, as a nation. They were being oppressed by the Romans. That was going on. Believe me, they weren't happy about it. They hadn't heard the voice of God. That's true. How long had it been? 400 years, right? We know about that. Okay, there was something else going on, and we find this out in Judaism very shortly after Moses comes down off the mountain, okay, the Jews had the law of the Lord. They knew what God wanted from them and expected from them, and immediately they started veering off trying to do their own thing. Do you know that the Christian church did the exact same thing? We actually have a report card written by Jesus. When you turn to the book of Revelation, written by the Apostle John, now, we don't know exactly when it was written. Well, someone knows. I don't know. Okay, John knows. I don't know what year it was written, but most people believe that it was written as one of the last books in the Bible, possibly as late as 80, 90, even 100 AD. And when John wrote the book of Revelation, we find in those first 3 chapters that there are 7 letters written to 7 churches. We find out that those 7 churches were real churches around the world at the time. And do you know in those 7 churches that Jesus gives them a report card? He says, hey, I know who you are and where you are, and you're doing this right and you're doing this wrong, and you need to fix this and you're doing this well. And he writes to another church. There's the church at Ephesus and the church at Philippi and the church at Laodicea. And there's all these churches, the 7 of them that Jesus was writing these letters to. Do you know that 2 of those churches didn't have one good thing written to them? Not one thing did Jesus say, hey, you're doing well. Yeah. There was also 2 churches where Jesus didn't say one thing they were doing wrong. Now, what's crazy about the whole thing is the churches that were doing nothing wrong, they thought that they weren't doing well and they needed to do better. And Jesus said, no, you guys are doing great. Just keep it up. And the churches that thought they had it all figured out, Jesus said, hey, by the way, you're not doing anything well. Okay, you guys are a hot mess and you need to fix this. Jesus was crucified. Now, I did my homework, okay, this last 2 weeks, because I was looking up some stuff and I was writing a totally different message, nothing to do with this. And I was trying to nail down the date, the year that Jesus was crucified, okay? And there are a lot of opinions on the date, and I like dates, okay? I like history, and I like starting history and timelines with a firm date. And I have concluded, without a shadow of a doubt, that Jesus was crucified in 31, 32, and 33 AD. So if that helps anyone, there you have it. We got it nailed down, okay? My point is, Jesus was crucified then. We're talking about less than 60 years. And half of the churches that Jesus wrote letters to were already in a mess. Some of them were wholly idolatrous and pagan. Some of them never came back. At the time Jesus came, there were some groups that were leading the Jews astray. They were leading them away from the law of Moses, like God gave to them, and they were leading them into what we call Pharisaical Judaism. And Jesus came back and he was saying, look, guys, you're veering off and you're going wrong here and you're going wrong here, and we want to get you back to what the Bible said, what we taught. Well, the group that he was correcting, they didn't like him very much. I completely forgot where I was going with this. Okay, so we said when Jesus came, this woman represents the nation of Israel being spiritually sick. They were wrapped up in the traditions of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, rather than doing what God had told them to do all the way back in the days of Moses when he came down from Mount Sinai. He gave them the law of the Lord. They were following these fellas rather than God's teaching. They were spiritually sick. They just needed to correct that. And I should tell you, there was a large group in the nation of Israel that was happy that Jesus came. And they were getting right in line, and they're like, you're the guy. We believe you're Messiah. We're ready to go. We're excited you're here. This is all good. There was another group that was even worse. They weren't spiritually sick. They were spiritually dead. And this little girl who, she was dead. Everybody knew she was dead. Jesus knew she was dead. Jairus, her father, knew she was dead. All the people that were there, the mourners, the folks playing music, I don't know, I clearly don't understand a Jewish funeral in the morning that takes place in the time of Jesus, because I don't know what the music was about, but it was the way it worked. Everybody knew she was dead. When Jesus came in and said, she's not dead, she's sleeping, they all laughed him to scorn. What Jesus was saying is, look, they're not dead. They're coming back. And Jesus was the solution to even those that are spiritually dead. Now, this is one of the points that I want to make. And boy, have I gotten into fights with people about this. God is not done with the nation of Israel. You understand that? God is not done with the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel has a mission and destiny in the end times that is different from the church. God is not done with the nation of Israel. Any church who says their people are now God's chosen people, because God is done with the Jews, that church is run by the devil. There are many churches that teach that, and that is nonsense. There are many churches that teach that their church is the one true church, and their people are now God's chosen people. All of those churches are false religions run by the devil and his false prophets. God's chosen people have always and always will be the nation of Israel. Pam, you got a question? Yeah, so we get adopted. They're still the kids. Okay? So now I'm going to show you something that's important for us to understand, and a lot of people get mixed up with their theology. They don't understand that the nation of Israel and the church in the Bible have a different origin, mission, and destiny. Okay, now I'm going to show you by drawing a picture. Let's go to Romans chapter 11, verses 26 and 27. Paul, writing in the book of Romans, says, "And so all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Sion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins." Did you know that there is a coming a day on earth when all the Jews on earth will be saved? That's what the Bible says. It says it in a bunch of places, but it says it clearly in Romans 11. When will that happen? Anyone want to render a guess? It will happen after the rapture. Anyone want to be more specific? All of your answers are correct. Okay, after the tribulation, also correct. Got a bunch of right answers. Very good. Okay, so what we're waiting for here, when we're talking about biblical eschatology, study of the end times, okay, we are waiting for one event called the rapture. Jesus is coming back for his bride, the rapture of the bride of Christ. Then is going to be a period of 7 years. That period of 7 years is broken up into two periods of 3.5 years. What do we call that 70-year period? Now, don't holler it out. Think first, because y'all sometimes holler out the wrong answer, because we've been taught the wrong answer for centuries. What's that? Thank you, Christy. What do we call that 7-year period? Who's got it? Mac? Time of Jacob's trouble is pretty good. Okay, that's what Jesus called it. What else can we call it? There's one other name for it. What's that? Okay, 70th week of Daniel. Randy, you failed. Take 1 gold star away from Randy. No, now here's why I'm going to tell you, okay? So we've all been taught it's called the tribulation, okay? And the tribulation does happen in that 7-year period, but the tribulation only takes up the last 3.5 years. It is there, and all the Revelation that we're talking about talks about that time period, but the 7-year period is often called the Great Tribulation. So this is called the 70th week of Daniel. Right there. Can you believe that? I wrote the answer right on the board. Okay. So what happens is the church is taken out of the way. Every saved person. Now, I'm going to give you the old Venn diagram here. We have 2 groups of people talked about in the Bible. 2 and only 2. Mac, what are they? Very good. We have Jews and we have Gentiles. Those are the only 2 groups talked about in the whole Bible. Now, we can break them down into different names. We also have the saved and the lost. We have, you could fill in the Venn diagram differently. Understand, there's a group here in the middle. These are the saved. This is the bride of Christ. This is the, go ahead, Christy, church. Okay, I don't like using that term church to describe this group in the middle. Does anyone know why? Because there are 2 groups in the Bible called the church. There is the local church. That's where we are. The local church is a group of called out believers. There is a pastor. There are deacons. Okay, there is membership. The Bible gives parameters to the local church. Then there is every saved person in the world, which is also called in the Bible the church. That is the universal and visible church. There is no pastor of that church. That's the church where Jesus is the head. Now, Jesus is also supposed to be the head of this church. Don't misunderstand. Jesus calls this group, all saved people, both Jews and Gentiles, the bride of Christ. We read about that in Ephesians chapter 5. 6 is armor of God. I think 5 is, 5. Okay, so now what's going to happen is this group of saved people is going to take off during the rapture. What is the purpose of this 7-year period? Also, incorrectly taught in churches all around the world. What is the purpose of this 7-year period? Partial credit to Pam to have sinners repent. Yes, sir? It's not terrible, okay? It's not off, but it's not the purpose. There is one singular purpose for this 7-year period, and specifically, Randy, what you were calling the last half, which is the tribulation. Now, let me go over it a little bit more. Hold on here, okay? Because this is a hint. I don't know if it's a good hint, okay, but this is a hint. The reason this is broken down into 3.5-year periods is because right in the middle is an event, a big event. Okay, now this little box right there represents a room. This room is a room where nobody is ever allowed in, except for one guy, okay, in the temple, in the holiest of holies. There are 2 items kept in there. Now, please understand, the temple does not exist. We had the first temple built during Solomon's time. The Babylonians took care of that in 586 BC. After that, Ezra and Nehemiah, after 70 years of captivity in Babylon, they come back. They build the wall and the city and the streets, and then they build the temple and they rededicate it. So temple number 2 is in place. That temple is the one that survives all the way up through the time of Christ. That's the temple that Jesus visited 3 times a year. Okay, during the spring for the feast days, during the fall for the feast days, and the feast day right in the middle, which we call Pentecost, he would go to Jerusalem just like everybody else, and that temple was there. He saw that temple. He's been to that temple. Inside that temple, there is one room, the holiest of holies. Only the high priest is allowed in that room, and he's only allowed in that room one day a year. Anyone, for extra credit, want to tell me what the day of the year that is? Give it a shot. Yom Kippur, very good. Holiest of holy days. Inside the Holy of Holies, there are two items. This is back in Jesus' day. What are those two items inside the Holy of Holies? Ark of the Covenant, that's one. And the mercy seat. We think of those as the same item. They are not. They're talked about differently, and they have different roles in prophecy. The Ark of the Covenant is a wooden box, about as big as this pulpit if you turned it on its side. It's overlaid with gold. The mercy seat is the lid, the cover, and that is pure gold. And these items are in the Holy of Holies, and no one is allowed in there. Do you know that rulers of the world have tried to enter into the Holy of Holies, and God has supernaturally stopped them? He has stopped generals with armies from getting into the Holy of Holies. One of the most famous incidences was a Roman ruler who had a seizure right outside of the temple because he was going to march into the temple and he was going to desecrate it. God said, nope. Now, what's going to happen in this one room, right in the middle of that 7-year period? Fella's going to stand up inside that room, and he's going to stop the sacrifices, which means the sacrifices are coming again, which also means a temple is going to be rebuilt in Jerusalem again. We're waiting for that. Let me tell you, that's going to be an exciting week in the news, because there's already some stuff there. Yeah. A mosque called the Dome of the Rock. And those folks don't play too well with the Jews. So however that's going to work out, it's going to be exciting. Temple's going to be built. This fella, we call the Antichrist, is going to stand up in that temple on a certain day. He's going to declare himself to be God, and he's going to cause the sacrifices to cease. Now, on that day, every single one of the Jews that's looking at that fella, who, by the way, I believe, this is conjectures, okay? I believe was instrumental in helping that temple get built. You're going to need a powerful world ruler to get all these different groups to play well together so that we can get that third temple built. He's going to stand up and say, nope, no more sacrifices, I am God. In that day, every one of the Jews on earth is going to look at what's going on. They're going to say, oh boy. That's a problem. They're going to know that this guy is not a good guy, he is a bad guy. Does that help anyone with my original question? What is that 7-year period for? What's that? To gather the Jews. The entire purpose of the 7-year period is to get the Jews to recognize that Jesus is Messiah. And at the end of that 7-year period, someone's coming back. He's coming back from heaven. He's got on a white robe. He's coming back with all these folks that he took off with back here from the rapture. And all the Jews are going to look to Messiah coming down from the clouds and say, you're the one. You're the one we've been waiting for. And that is the day that Paul is talking about in Romans 11. Every single individual from the nation of Israel will be saved on that same day. All right, this period of time is predicted in Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31, verses 33 and 34. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Now, in verse 33, the phrase, after those days are the 70th week of Daniel. You can read the rest of the chapter for, not perspective, for context. Thank you. Stay out of my preaching. They will all know the Lord. Zechariah talks about this as well. Zechariah chapter 13, verse 9. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God. The fire that they will be brought through that Zechariah is talking about, once again, when you read the chapter for context, is this 70th week of Daniel. The good news is that at the end of that time, all the Jews will look at Jesus as Messiah. They will say, the Lord is my God, as quoted in Zechariah 13:9. Any questions? Okay, so my guess is by bloodline. Beyond that, don't ask me specifics. Okay, don't ask me if you got to be 100% or 50%. I don't have a clue. Okay, I really don't. But everyone that is in the nation of Israel is going to recognize that's Messiah all in one day.
And you're not talking about actually physically anywhere in the world.
Everywhere and everywhere. Yeah. Anywhere and everywhere. Not just in the city of Jerusalem. Correct. All. Mason, what you got?
You say all the Jews will be saved?
Yes.
Is that like dead and currently living?
That's a great question.
Because
it doesn't seem like it, and you want to know why? Okay, so this is one of the ugliest parts of the Bible. In Zechariah 13:9, I didn't highlight this or dwell on this. It says, I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined. Do you understand that means 2/3 do not make it? 2/3 of the Jews perish. Do you realize that when the devil and his demons possessed Adolf Hitler, and he decided to carry out his final solution to try to exterminate every one of the Jews on earth? And I say that because everything he did went against logic and all military tactics. When you start losing a war, you bring all of your troops back to the capital and you try to defend the one area that you need to keep going. When Adolf Hitler knew that the Germans were going to lose, did he bring his troops back? No. He issued the order to execute the final solution. He says, your final order is to spend every resource you have and kill every Jew on earth. That is what Adolf Hitler said. That is madness. And that is driven by demons. And when he did that, 1/3 of all the Jews in the world died. Zechariah talks about an event, yet future, where 2/3 are going to die. Yes, ma'am. Nation of Israel, established in 1948 again. Jews are anyone, children of Jacob. Any follow-up? Okay. Louis?
On the Antichrist. Every generation there would have to be an Antichrist on deck.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's Louis' question. Here's the problem. The Antichrist has to be ready to move into this position whenever the time is right. Now, does the devil know when Jesus is coming back? No. You ready for this? Does Jesus know when Jesus is coming back? He said he didn't. He said, I'm waiting for the Father to tell me. Now, that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, okay? But we understand that Jesus, when he became man, he gave up some stuff to be able to be fully man. Now, we know he's still God. That didn't change. But when he said, I don't know the day or the hour, only the Father in heaven knows. I believe that. I believe he still doesn't know. Now, you can disagree. That's fine. My point is, when this takes place and this is set in motion, this fella needs to be in a position of authority where he can step into the role of the Antichrist. Well, if nobody knows when this is going to happen, that means that the devil needs to always have somebody on deck, prepped and ready to step into that position. Not a generation has gone by where a world ruler or someone, let's call him the deputy world ruler, okay, of some nation hasn't been prepped by the devil and ready to step into that role as the Antichrist, which is required for the end times. There's one ready now. There'll be one ready in 20 years from now. Whenever this thing happens. Yeah, I know. Good question. Yes, sir.
The way of Christ, where he gives us those two commandments, love thy neighbor as yourself and have no other than the Lord.
Uh-huh.
Would that be the way of the Lord? And anything against that be anti?
Well, so anti is actually does not mean against. It is often believed that the word anti means against. The word anti actually means in place of. So he who is coming is going to try to act in place of Christ and tell people that he is God. Yes?
So I believe that the Antichrist has been here for quite some time because the word says anyone who claims that the Lord God hasn't already come in the flesh
Uh-huh.
is not of God.
Sure.
So why are we still waiting on his return? And then he killed him, he resurrected, and then he told his followers, now you have seen the Father.
So he said he's coming back.
He said he will send his helper.
No, he said, I will be back. In John chapter 10. He said, and just as I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself, and there will you be with me always.
He said, I. And it's very important that we don't lean on what we understand I to be as being a possessive form of speaking. For the first word of God was, I am that I am. And he also gave it to Moses. I am that I am.
Uh-huh.
So to have I returning would be the image of God.
No, Jesus said he's coming back. He said he's also coming back after this, riding a white horse. It's very clear, although I don't have time to go down, on the rabbit trail.
Is it clear though?
Oh, yeah.
If we're still preaching from the scriptures that they've been teaching from since the time before they crucified our Lord?
Yep, 100%. No concern whatsoever. Jesus brings it up. As a matter of fact, for every one prophecy about the first coming of Christ, the Bible, through the Old and New Testaments, has 8 prophecies about the second coming of Christ. This 7-year period is the most talked about period of time in Earth's history. And more is talked about that 7-year period in the Bible than any other individual subject in the entire Bible. So when I say, is Jesus coming back to take home the bride of Christ, and is Jesus coming back not only to set earth aright, but also to sit on the throne, okay, and rule and reign over the world from Jerusalem for 1,000 years, I am more sure of those two events happening by Messiah than I am in the fact that my name is Patrick Hayes. So yes, no doubt whatsoever. Okay. Yes, Pam.
So you seem pretty confident that it's a free, true, rapture and
100%. Good question. Okay. Boy, where were we? All right. I know where we were. We were about to start the book of Matthew, chapter 9. See why I said we weren't going to get very far? Okay, Matthew chapter 9. Let's read verses 32 through 35, and we'll jump in and look at these verse at a time. As they went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man possessed with a devil. And when the devil was cast out, the dumb spake, and the multitudes marveled, saying, it was never so seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, he casteth out devils through the prince of the devils. And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. All right, in verse 32, so although we're going to start in verse 32, I want to ask you a question about verse 33. Why were the people so impressed? It said they marveled. It said it was never so seen in Israel. Well, so your answer is correct. So the answer given was it was only God that could perform that type of miracle. Now, the Jews had seen demons cast out of people before. This did not start at the time of Christ. There were Jews that cast out demons before Christ arrived. However, the procedure for exorcism in Judaism requires the demon to identify himself. What happens if you are confronted by a demon whose specialty was to render the possessed mute? Well, you're kind of out of luck. That demon's never going to identify themselves. And the belief was at that time was that we are unable to exorcise a demon of this type out of a person. This man was unable to speak. So when Jesus casts out the demon out of a demon-possessed man who was mute, all the people marveled and they said, this is amazing. It was never so seen in Israel. Jesus did something that none of the religious leaders up to that point were able to do. Now, in verse 34, the Pharisees defended themselves by accusing Jesus. Now, notice they don't deny what Jesus did. They just say that the mechanism used by Jesus is the devil. Now, you need to remember this idea because from Matthew chapter 12 on, everything changes in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus completely changes his public ministry. The nation of Israel begins to reject Jesus as Messiah starting in chapter 12. They didn't reject him as Messiah at the cross. They start in chapter 12. And from that point on, Jesus only teaches in public using parables. He never teaches in public again without using parables. Now, we're going to talk more about that when we get to chapter 12. I just want you to be aware of it, and I'm going to bring up this portion of Scripture again. Now, moving on to verse 35. Three things happen in verse 35. Number one, Jesus goes around to all the cities and villages teaching in their synagogues. So, the synagogue, it was much like our church today. They met on Saturday, on the Sabbath day. They studied the scriptures. They worshiped God. Now, here's my question. How was Jesus able to go to every synagogue in every city and preach? He did go on foot. I'm going to give you your gold star back for that one, Randy. That's very true. Okay?
Tradition.
It was. There was a tradition. So this is the way it works, and I brought this up before, but I want to talk about it again just because it's interesting. There is a custom in Judaism that remains through today. So every Saturday in every synagogue around the world, they read through the entire Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This reading is done on a schedule. So if you happen to be on vacation visiting so-and-so in the, I don't know, north or south of Israel and you're somewhere else, on Shabbat you would go to the local synagogue and you knew what they were going to be teaching on. Because every single year, every Saturday, they would have a schedule, and it was the same every year. So you would know what's going to be taught. You could read the scriptures ahead of time, kind of prepare. Now, the interesting thing about this method is that if you were traveling as a rabbi, the custom was that you would be invited to preach from those scriptures on that Saturday. So wherever Jesus went, when he visited a synagogue on the Sabbath, he was the visiting rabbi, and the custom was, whoever was going to preach asked, would you be so kind as to expound on the scriptures for us today? We'd love to hear from the visiting rabbi. So every time Jesus went into the synagogue, he was granted an audience, and he was able to preach. Now, what subject did Jesus teach on? Says in verse 35, preaching the gospel of the kingdom. He would expound on the scriptures and talk about Messiah. He would talk about himself. You see, everywhere in the scriptures, it talks about Jesus, if you know where to look. If you are ever reading the Old Testament and you're having trouble figuring out what this portion means, doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what this is talking about. Put Jesus right in the middle of it and it'll help you out. That is Bible Interpretation 101. Do you know why? John tells us in John chapter 5, verse 39, search the scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me. Jesus shared the gospel. Messiah was coming to take away the sins of the world. That's what he preached everywhere he went. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Remember what his cousin was teaching back in Matthew chapter 3? Okay, and the third thing that happens in verse 35, healing every sickness and every disease among the people. He healed everyone. Now, this was prophesied some 500 years ago in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 35, verses 4 through 6. Say to them that are of a fear. You know what? If you have your Bible, go to Isaiah 35. This is important. You're going to want to see this one. I got a little miniature rabbit trail that we're going to hit. It's very important. I want you to see this. Isaiah chapter 35, verses 4, 5, and 6. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out and streams in the desert. Now, when we read in Isaiah 35, 4 through 6, one thing that we see is that there is a messianic prophecy about when Messiah comes, he will heal. He will heal the blind. Okay, he will give sight to the blind. He will allow the dumb to speak. Okay, the lame will jump up and run. This was something everyone was looking forward to. So much so that when the disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus, which is going to happen in Matthew chapter 11, they asked him, they said, hey, are you Messiah? Or should we be waiting for someone else? Like, are you the guy, or is there another one coming after you? Jesus didn't even answer their question. He just said, what do the scriptures say? It says that the blind shall receive sight, the lame shall walk, the dumb shall speak. Go and tell your master what you've seen. He's saying, just look at what I'm doing. You have the answer. The scriptures say, I'm the guy. Now, I want to point this out. This is a tiny little rabbit trail, but it'll help. In Isaiah 35, verses 4, 5, and 6, we see multiple messianic prophecies. We see specifically 3. It says, and I'm going to read this again, say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. When Jesus came in the Gospels, did he come with vengeance? Do you all see a bunch of vengeance taking place? Not a lot of vengeance there. You know when we do see some vengeance? I think there's an A in there somewhere. We see vengeance coming in the second coming. Then it says in verse 5, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. The lame man will leap as an hart, it's a type of deer. Tongue of the dumb shall sing. When did that happen? Happened in the first coming of Christ, right? Then it says, for in the wilderness shall waters break out and streams in the desert. Did that happen at the first coming of Christ? No. Does it happen at his second coming? Does not. That happens during the 1,000-year millennial reign. The earth is transformed. We read about Jesus coming as a lion and as a lamb, right? Lion, lamb. We read about Jesus as a king and as a servant. King, servant. Oh, it will be as well. We could throw it down there if you want. Yeah. Here's my point. Sometimes it's easy to shake our head at the Jews and say, how did you not know he was Messiah? How did you not know he was there with you? Well, there were some problems. The messianic prophecies, of which there were hundreds, were just like these 3 verses in Isaiah. They had prophecies of the Messiah coming for his first coming and for his second coming, all mixed together. And nobody realized that he was going to come 2 times. Do you know that the rabbis actually taught there would be 2 Messiahs? No, not all of them, but there is a sect that saw the differences and they said, these have to be 2 guys. How can one be a king and one be a servant? How can one die as a lamb and one be a lion? This doesn't make sense. And the scriptures that were the messianic prophecies were not laid out neat and orderly like we would do in a book, because we're looking at them in hindsight. Half of them happened. Well, obviously, okay, yeah, great, those are his first coming. Then we have a second coming. So there were, someone said it before, what were the Jews going through at the time? Not spiritually, politically. What was going on at the time? Yeah, Romans, oppression. What did they want? Did they want a servant who was a lamb? No. They wanted a king who was a lion, who was going to kick off the Romans and take back the world. That wasn't the first coming. He's coming back, and he's going to do those things. But that's the reason that so many did not accept Jesus as Messiah when he first came. I've got 4 minutes to teach 25 minutes worth of material. Yeah, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to read the last 3 verses. We're going to go through them. And then next week, we're going to start off with what I thought was the most important part of this entire message, which we're just going to skip because I don't have time to do it, and I don't want to run through it. So let's read the last 3 verses, 36 through 38. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Then saith he unto his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. Okay. Finishing up Matthew 9. Verse 36, sheep without a shepherd. There was no one to lead them and guide them. Do you know what another job of the shepherd? He was to lead and guide, yeah. He would take care, you got it, okay. He would take care of the new lambs, anyone that was born, he'd pay special attention to. Pam? He was an authoritarian and a disciplinarian for their benefit, okay. So, and that was the extreme case that Pam's talking about where the shepherd would break the leg of the sheep. If they continued to wander and would not stay with the pack, he would break, there's the rod and the staff. David said, your rod and your staff comfort me. One of them was used to break the leg of a sheep. Now, that was an extreme example, and the shepherd did not want to do that. Why not? He had to carry it. He had to mend that sheep, and he would carry it until it was healed enough where it could walk. And in that time, the sheep would bond with the shepherd and grow to trust the shepherd. How many Christians say, oh, why do we suffer trials? Oh, why do we have hard times? Well, sometimes it's because the shepherd is trying to teach us something, that we need to stay close to him and trust him. Now, that's not a fun lesson, but we all need to learn it. Okay, what else does a shepherd do? There's one more, Mac. There's several more. What's that? He fights off the wolves. There was nobody to protect these people. Do you know that is the job? The Bible talks about us as sheep and God as the shepherd. It also talks about those people in the church being the sheep. And what's the job of the pastor? One of them is the shepherd. If you don't believe that your pastor loves you and wants the best for you and loves God and obeys God and is willing to do anything to help you, then you should find a church where you do believe that. That is the job of the pastor. I hate to say it, lots of us fail. It's not an easy job, but that's what we're supposed to do. And that's what you're supposed to feel like, is that there's trust and comfort. It's the goal. Jesus was upset because of this problem, and he explains the problem. What do we need? says we need more shepherds. Verse 37. Harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. We could talk about this more next week. It's going to tie in a little bit. We need more people looking after the sheep. In verse 36, sorry, I don't know why I wrote 36. It's 38, 36, 7, and 8. Jesus said, "Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into the harvest." We need to pray that God will send more laborers into the harvest. Now, this is interesting because when Jesus said this, Jesus knows that we need more. And God the Father knows that we need more. And Jesus still tells us to pray for more. Our prayers are required, even though Jesus knows what needs doing here. God the Father knows what we need. It's still up to us to get on our knees and go before God and ask a holy God to please provide what he is telling us we need. We're part of the solution. For whatever reason, God included us in improving the church, growing the church, leading the lost to Christ. For whatever reason, he left that task to us. And he said, but you can't do it on your own. You're going to fail. So include me, and we can do it. But you're still the one that's going to do it. But you need me. It's a big calling. We call it the Great Commission. We're going to look at that more. Last thing I'm going to say, and we'll be done. In chapter 9, through the ministry of Jesus up to this point, we have seen several things. In his first sermon, Jesus announced that the Spirit of God was upon him. We find that in Luke chapter 4. He quotes Isaiah 61. Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives. I'm going to butcher I'm not going to try to quote it all. Then Jesus showed that he had power over disease, over leprosy and palsy and fever. In chapter 8, he has power over nature with calming the storms. He has power over Satan. In chapter 9, we see he has power over sin. He has power over death. He raises the dead girl, Jairus' daughter. He has power over darkness, and he has power over demons, all found in chapter 9. I believe that Matthew is demonstrating the credentials of Jesus. He's telling us who this guy is and that he is the one we were waiting for. And he is completely worthy to be called Messiah. And what we're going to see in chapter 10, which we will start next week, is that Jesus is about to send out the 12 for a special mission. But I believe, as I said, the purpose of chapters 8 and 9 is to show us exactly who Jesus is. Jesus, he was a prophet, but that's not all he was. He was a good man, but that's not all he was. Jesus was Messiah. And it's so important. If we lose that fact, no matter what we believe about Jesus, it doesn't matter. The number one thing that matters is that we believe that Jesus is God. All right, we're going to have a word of prayer, and we're going to get some folks baptized. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer, and we'll be out of here. Washington, would you be so kind as to close us in a word of prayer?